But it's cool. Start. So, hey Rebecca. Imagine that little bit here. That before you get home. They distribute it. Where does it distribute? And then good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you'd like to find a spot, we're getting ready to start with this part of our Eco Fair. I know a lot of you are anxiously looking forward to having this teaching experience. It's going to be amazing. We're at Grace Church in the Mountains, in case you didn't know, and this event is sponsored by our Creation Care Ministry. We're inspired by our faith teaching that all of creation is holy and is to be cared for. And our actions arise from gratitude for the beauty of this earth, our island home. This is our mission statement. Grace Creation Care Ministry responds to the call to revere the sacred beauty of God's creation by working with other grace ministries and the community to foster intentional and sustainable practices by engaging hearts and minds through education, service, and advocacy. In 2022, we entered our Grace Giving Garden in a national contest called Pool Congregation, sponsored by Interfaith Power and Light in the category Sacred Ground. We were notified in early 2023 that we had won the national prize for transformation of church lawn into a community teaching garden. And this you'll see after our speaker has finished the lawn part is in the back in the garden. Grace Giving Garden. It's a source of organic produce for our food pantry, a native plant habitat, monarch way station, and a place to celebrate the unique beauty of our mountain ecosystem. In discussing how best to use the prize money, we decided to host an eco and to invite Dr. Rebecca Wall as our speaker to teach community members how to transform areas around their homes or businesses into native habitat havens. In addition, we've invited various agencies and volunteers to share their knowledge of sustainable practices and resources with you under the tent. We're glad you're joining us today, and we hope you will find new information as well as inspiration for your efforts to care for our. Thank you again for being here.
I would like to introduce baby sister, or is it sister baby? Okay, she's sister baby, and my daughter is baby sister. But she grew up on these mountains, running around, and she began her career as an academic historian and museum professional working at the Smithsonian, leading cultural heritage preservation and working with UNESCO. She has a master's in sustainable landscape design from the George Washington University and a PhD in history from the University of Michigan. I have never foreseen that she would become a landscape architect, but her love of nature and passion for the environment makes sense. She comes by it naturally with a mother who co-leads the environmental action community of Western North Carolina. And she and her mother, if you ever go looking at flowers together, oh, look at that. Ansimia trifolium. You mean the jack in the pulpit? And look at that Lilium superbum. You mean the Turk's cap lily? You know, she just lives and breathes the natural world. And we're proud to welcome Haywood County's own Rebecca Wall.
Can everybody hear me all right? How's that? Is that better? All right, I will endeavor to speak like my father, very loudly. It's so nice to be here and to see so many friendly faces. Thank you, Mary Ellen, and the Creation Eco Fair for having me. It's a wonderful organization. So I'm here today to talk to you about what I like to call ecological gardening. It's the PowerPoint. Yeah. So ecological gardens, we define as ecological gardens are gardens of connectivity. Yeah. They only work on Macs, ecological gardens. Yeah, gardens are Garden time. You know, you gotta take time for things to grow. Okay. So, what is ecological gardens? There we go. So traditionally, when we think about our gardens, we're thinking about gardens as like our own garden space. In the United States, we're very into the idea of private property. In the UK, you can go and walk around anyone's property. It's nice, you can just sort of hike anywhere. But when we talk about ecological gardens, we're thinking about our garden as part of a larger ecology. So in this area, your garden can be part connected to the ecology of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Where I live, it might be connected to the ecology of, say, the Vino Canal or the Greater Potomac watershed. We might need to take a look. Take a picture. Okay. So, ecological gardens. I describe myself as an ecological garden designer, which is different than your conventional garden designer because we are interested in aesthetics and beauty primarily, but also how our gardens can provide habitat for wildlife, capture stormwater, capture carbon, and help promote a healthier ecology locally. So, about myself, as Mary Alice said, I started out museum professional, and that job took me all over the world. So it was great. I got to go to West Africa, Europe, spent a lot of time in Armenia, of all places. If you have any questions about Armenia, let me know. But I kept being called back to these places, right? To the beautiful Smoky Mountains and the natural world and wanting to work outside. So I went back to school to get certified as a sustainable landscape designer. And in these places, recreating these kinds of places, drawing inspiration from them, that gives me inspiration every day. So I'm really happy to be here. So this is a company I work with in Maryland, and we're a little bit unique. So we are a landscape design build firm. We have a number of landscape architects and designers in the firm, and then we install our own designs as well. This is because we are controllers and want to be sure that we know how our gardens are being built. But we're also unique in that we are certified organic land care professionals. So we're certified through the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and that means we don't use any chemicals in any of our installations. So no herbicides, no pesticides. We do everything by hand. It's a lot of hard manual labor. It's also a lot of waiting. If we have a client say who's got an infestation of mugwort, we're going to say you've got to wait for your new garden until we smother that for a year and get it really, really ready to receive these new plants. Site preparation is so important. And these are some of the amazing folks who work on our crews. So often when we talk about beautiful gardens, we see these photos of public gardens and private gardens. We don't talk about the people whose hands are in the dirt creating those spaces. So these are some of the really amazing people who build these gardens for us. And we're really proud that we also have some women foremen on our team. So today's journey, we're going to go on a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. So before I get to that though, throughout the presentation, you will see photos of plants, and below, and I apologize if this is a little hard to see in the back, the botanical names of those plants. I always get frustrated when I go to presentations and there's beautiful photos of gardens and I have no idea what the plant is. So my hope is that you can avoid that. If there's anything you have questions about, any particular plants, I'd be happy to answer those questions at the end of the talk or when we're walking through the garden afterwards. So today's journey. So we're about here. Feeling good, the weather is beautiful. Everybody just got a chance to go and talk with these amazing vendors outside. But we're gonna have to go down into what I affectionately call the pit of despair. Because we never understand what's the situation we've got ourselves into. Because things aren't looking so great ecologically in a lot of the planet. But there's hope. So my hope is that by the end of this, you leave feeling even more excited and elevated in your mood because you have some tools to create these gardens and bring some of nature home yourself. So to start, and then this is gonna get dark. So most American gardens are ecological dead zones. So what do we see here? This is your archetypal American suburban property. So we've got wall-to-wall lawn. This is a real person's property, I think in Indianapolis. He runs a turf care business. Got a lot of skills to mower. This was for the 4th of July. But what does it take to maintain this kind of property? What are the inputs? Chemicals. So lots of herbicides, lots of pesticides. Irrigation. Lawn is the largest irrigated crop in this country. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of water goes into making these lawns lush and green and low maintenance. That low maintenance involves mowing it every week in the summer, maybe twice. And those mowers and the blowers that blow the leaves off every fall, those are 2-stroke motors. They're about 11 times less efficient than the car motors. So we're polluting our air while we are creating and upkeeping this version of Eden. The source of this, the reference point for this is 17th and 18th century English manor houses. We don't live in England, right? We live in a different continent. There are different possibilities here. And I think we can start to redefine what beauty is and what we want our home landscapes to be. In this wall-to-wall carpet lawn, we have a few pockets of planting. They're probably ornamentals from Asia. There's probably a lot of evergreens by the house. You know, every house in the DC area that was built in the 50s, 60s, 70s got like a Japanese maple and Japanese pakistan. That was just the builder formula. And we see a lot of that still with new developers. The barberry, maybe some double file viburnum, but none of those plants are providing food for wildlife. And that's what we're missing. Because what's the cost? Since 1970, we've lost 2.9 billion birds that should be here. They're gone. Bachman's warbler, this is an illustration from Audubon's Birds of North America. This is Bachman's warbler. So this used to be a bird seen in the Carolinas, but it hasn't been seen since the 1980s. And this year it was declared officially extinct. So we're losing all these birds due to habitat loss. We're building new housing development. This bird used to live in floodplains, low-lying lands. Those lands are pretty cheap for developers, right? So those are the kind of species we're seeing as a kind of canary in the coal mine dying out soonest. They're also running out of food. We're losing 1% of all insects on the planet annually. This is a glamour shot of a native mason bee. This is from the USGS survey of bees. I love this. My daughter thinks it's the scariest thing in the 3 months. But think about your lived experience. So this is probably before my time, but I always hear stories about, oh, we used to go on these road trips to Ohio and cross country and have just our windshields were covered with insects. We had to stop and wash them off. I don't have that experience. That's not my lived experience. Where I live in the DC area, I know there's a couple people here who also live there. There are social media posts about where you can go and see fireflies because they're not everywhere anymore. There's a lot of suburban kids who don't have that experience of going out to the mason jar and capturing the firefly. So the lived experience of our children, their experience of nature is a little less magical every year. E.O. Wilson, the wonderful writer and scientist, wrote that insects are the little things that run the world. And this is true. We lose insects, we lose the foundation of our food webs and the foundation of the food webs that feed the birds, the salamanders, all the other animals that we enjoy and whose existence we also depend on. A third of our food is the product of pollination. Yeah, he wants the firefly. So we're almost out of the citizens. We're almost. Elizabeth Colbert, one of my favorite science writers, wrote this great book that I highly recommend called The Sixth Extinction. We are in what scientists call the Anthropocene, the age of man. We're just too successful a species. We have overpopulated. We've taken up land to build our own houses. We've drunk all the water. We have eaten all the fish. And in the next little while, more than 1 million plants and animals are in danger of extinction in the next few decades. This is happening all over the planet. So this is a study from Germany that found a 75% decline over 27 years in flying biomass. So those are the insects that fly in the air. What's causing this sharp decline in insects? There are articles in the New York Times about the insect apocalypse, all tied with the success and the growth of humans. But we have started to pinpoint specific vectors that might be accelerating the loss of insects. And one of those is the increase in non-native plants and the decline in native plants throughout our public and private spaces. So Doug Talamy is a really wonderful entomologist. He wrote Bringing Nature Home. I highly recommend his work. And he's led, as a senior scientist, a number of studies that have surveyed the impact that planting native plants in your home landscape, in your home gardens can have, and it's measurable. Home garden math. Again, E.O. Wilson said, if we want to save ourselves, we have to conserve half the earth.
I have to interrupt you. You all know we are neighbors with La Mexicanita, the Mexican store across the street, and Don Jose works so hard to keep his business going. And there are 4 cars that he thinks are folks here that are blocking his folks from being able to go into his store. So he's just kindly asked if you happen to park there, if you would consider moving your car so that his clients could come in and out of his store. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I felt like it was a neighborly thing to do.
Okay, thank you. So this is a map from the Half Earth Project. So E.O. Wilson famously wrote this book called Half Earth, and his argument is that we need to conserve half the land on Earth for non-human species. So this is a great website. I highly recommend you go and check it out. And I pulled up this particular map of North America because this is a map of the areas with the highest rarity of biodiversity in the world. So you can see Cuba is lit up like Las Vegas because Cuba is a hotspot for all these hummingbirds and butterflies. But another hotspot is, of course, the Southern Appalachians. So we are in the middle here of a biodiversity hotspot, which is why it's so important that we conserve the flora and fauna in this area, because there are animals and plants here that are not found anywhere else on Earth. And once they're gone, they're gone. So how can we solve this problem? Well, I believe you can start at home. So this is an example of a small garden that we planted for a client in the Silver Spring area. And thank you. And here you can see the different species listed. We have a spicebush swallowtail enjoying their time on Phlox paniculata. This phlox is a very interesting plant. So we talk about planting native plants and native species. There are other kinds of native species called cultivars. And a cultivar is when someone is out in the wild and they find a native plant that's particularly beautiful to them. The flowers are brighter. Maybe the leaves are a little purplish. Maybe there's more pollinators on it. Maybe it's shorter. So they think, oh, this could fit in my home garden. I can't have a 6-foot tall Joe Pye leaf, but this 3-foot tall one, that might work. So this is Phlox paniculata gina, which is a cultivar that was created at the Mount Cuba Center, or had been trialed at the Mount Cuba Center in Delaware. Now, Cuba is a public garden that's demonstrating what can be done with native plants. So they have formal gardens, they have beautiful woodlands. It's a great trip if you can ever go up. It's very close to the Longwood Gardens. You can make a weekend out of it. Phlox paniculata gina, this cultivar, is reproduced asexually. So it doesn't have the same genetic diversity as the native species in the wild. However, now Cuba found that in trials, it is more attractive to pollinators and butterflies than the straight species. So there are moments where what is most attractive for insects is also attractive for us. So in my practice, I use a lot of cultivars because I'm typically planting in small suburban lawns. We don't have vast estates typically where we can have huge flowering plants. We need smaller things that will fit in your average American landscape. So cultivars are one tool that we can use to bring native plants into our gardens without overwhelming ourselves. So what if the archetypal American garden went from this? From basis and the lack of movement to Amsonia hubertii that's waving in the wind, and phlox that's a buzz with butterflies, and rudbeckia. And the house is not as important as the garden in front. And why is this important? Homegrown National Park is here. I believe they have a table for one of their partners in the DC area. And Homegrown National Park is built on Doug Tallamy's argument that there's not enough public land in the United States to conserve wildlife, and specifically to conserve invertebrate insects. We have to look at private land in order to meet the baseline for conservation. 86% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is great. It's amazing. It's such an amazing national asset. It's not enough. We need to also do this work in our own gardens. These are the gardens, some of the gardens that we have constructed in the DC area. And you can see it's not a monolithic patch. It's not just like one contiguous. It's a patchwork. And that still works for insects and wildlife. This is creating what we call wildlife corridors. So a monarch butterfly might stop in Capitol Hill, or their morning coffee at a milkweed down there. They hop up to Rock Creek Park, Northwest DC, have another sip before they head on to Silver Spring and Frederick and on their merry way further. So this is creating hotspots where insects stop and have a bite, or birds can stop and eat some berries. So to conserve whole ecosystems, it works to start small. It's still going to have a big impact. What does this look like practically? So this is a property I worked on a few years ago. This is a very sort of typical suburban property. They built a huge house on this kind of small plot of land. And in front of it, the builder just left a lot of lawn. What you can't see is the house across the street, which is lower in elevation. So this house with their very large surface area, very large roof surface area, all the runoff would go down the lawn, across the street, and flood the house below them every time there was a big rainstorm. So this was not just about building habitat for wildlife, it's also building a little bit better relationships between neighbors. So this is a plan we developed, and this is the first year of growth. So here we have over 20 different species. We like to aim for at least 25 different species where we can. We brought in trees. These are rain gardens. These are all rain gardens. So even a rain garden that captures, you know, a couple thousand gallons of water in a big rain event can look like a beautiful garden and be approachable. It doesn't have to be a monolithic planting of just one type of plant either. You can have asters for fall interest. You can have carex as your ground mulch. Here's another, this is a neighbor of mine. Does anybody know what this plant is at the ground level? Yeah, I do. It's Japanese stiltgrass. It is a monoculture of Japanese stiltgrass, which lasts in the seed bank 7 years. It's tricky. We went in there and pulled it all out by hand and took out the top 3 inches of soil, which was a lot. We typically don't like to disrupt that much soil. It's kind of aggressive. So instead, we created a sun and shade meadow for them and a patio to sit within. Wherever possible, create spaces in your garden where you can sit and experience it. So you can sit and hear the insects. You can have your morning coffee. This client likes to go out there and do her yoga in the morning, watch the goldfinches land on the echinacea behind her. Here's that Japanese maple that every builder in the DC area put on new builds in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So we don't like to take out mature trees if they're not invasive. If it's with a Bartlett pear, we might have a different conversation because those are highly invasive and they smell terrible. So this Japanese maple, we left in place. So this client inherited this garden. Previous homeowners had put in a lot of pasta, which the deer love. It's like a deer salad bar. And a lot of evergreen azaleas that are beautiful for 2 weeks of the year. And then they were sort of bored with their landscape. It wasn't doing much for them. What we found when we started doing this installation was that the previous owner had also put weed barrier fabric all over the ground. So when we pulled that up, the smell of the anaerobic bacteria was so strong, it smelled terrible. And so we realized at that point that we also needed to include a lot more pioneer species to help break up the soil, fix nitrogen, and help bring the soil back to life. So this is the after. This again is 6 months after we did the installation. We planted a lot of perennials and plugs. So previously there was not a lot going on. Here we have a number of different carex species. Carex are sedges. They form the backbone of our wild eastern temperate forests. You'll see them pretty much everywhere you go, kind of green mulch that stitches together and suppresses weeds. They also, their seed heads, when they bloom in the spring, provide food for songbirds. So they're just a great plant to get to know. There's probably 600 different species, but there's only about 30 to 50 available in the nursery trade only. So you have a lot to choose from. We also included Calamagrostis brachytrichia here, which is Korean featherweed grass. So these are the panicles you see there that are kind of evocative of sedum. That's a non-native plant, but it's not invasive. It's adapted to our area. It can take sun and shade. So you don't have to be a purist either. Doug Tallamy's research has found that if you have 75 to 80% native plants in your garden, that's going to have a measurable positive impact for insects. So you have a little bit of space to play You don't have to throw away your grandmother's camellia. That can stay and work around it. I always tell people, look to the ground layer because often we just have a bed of mulch. That's a missed opportunity to include a whole lot of plants that can do a whole lot. This is the back of that same property. You can see it was just sort of left. So there's a downspout in the corner. You can see this on the right side. If you're looking at the path on the right side, where you see the grass coming up, that's a small rain garden. So again, finding opportunities where the water from the downspout can flow into plants that are often found on floodplains, like panicum, like sweet bay magnolia, all these plants that can do well with both flooding and patches of dry. The ground cover here is a plant that I really love and we're using more and more of, which is Lizomachia lanceolata purpurea. We'll get a quiz on that later. So that's lance leaf loose stripe. And that is a cultivar that's been selected for its burgundy foliage. It has delicate yellow flowers and it's just a really aggressive kind of rambling ground cover that helps choke out weeds. This is the back. They had an old pond that no one was really using. It was leaky. There was one survivor boy that had lived through who knows what that was still there at the bottom of the pond. So we took the koi out, we preserved the koi, we sealed the pond, and then we brought in some pickerel weed, which is a great native wetland plant. So here you see the pickerel weed, which has beautiful purple blooms in summer. Having a source of water in your garden is really important for wildlife. Songbirds need to drink. It's great for dragonflies, which eat insects, which eat mosquitoes. We had dragonflies for the first time in my own home garden this year. It was very exciting. And in the background here, we have some Rus copalina, which is smooth sumac, with very tall panicum or Virginia switchgrass in between the sumac. So in the fall, when the panicum is at its 7-foot height, it looks kind of like fireworks going off in between the sumac. And behind the sumac, we planted a row of oak trees and sweet bay magnolia. So as those oak trees grow up and provide more shade, then the sumac is going to start declining. It's going to get less sun. Again, Japanese maple. Did you see? So here we took out all the lawn in the front. We left the Japanese maple, which is beautiful, and we added in a patchwork of native spring blooming plants. So here we have Ignini caroliniana. It's this bright pink you see. We also have moss phlox subulata. There's a little woodland moment here underneath the Japanese maple, so we took advantage of that shade. So also within a very small front yard, you have full sun to almost full shade, which gives you a wider repertoire of plants that will be happy in that environment and that you can bring in. And this is my own garden. So, and there's my parents' car. North Carolina place. So this was the property when we bought it. Again, very typical DC Cape Cod. Very narrow lot, got about 1,500, 1,800 square feet in the front of the property. It was all lawn, weeds. And then in between our house and our neighbors, we had this lovely euonymus hedge, which was basically full of porcelainberry and mulberry trees and all sorts of fun invasive plants. And our neighbors next door, for the second week we lived there, thought about taking out that hedge. Every time they would pull their cars down the driveway, they'd hear it. And a lot of scratches. So we did. We took it out. There was a crepe myrtle also here. We planted crepe myrtle personally. They don't do anything for the insects who populate North America because they're from India. And they also are getting prick bark scale in our area a lot, which is a very aggressive fungus that turns them black. Not the most attractive. So we've had to start taking them out. And we repurpose a lot of crepe myrtle branches, which are beautiful, as railings and sculptures people start. Yeah. So they can have a second life. So we took out all the lawn by hand, and then we planted about 36 different species. My husband said he'd never valued the work that our crews do more. after doing this. It was a mixture of 3 gallon, 1 gallon, and then a lot of plug. So those are perennials that you can buy in a tray of plants that looks kind of like a cupcake tray. And they have deep, deep roots. You put them in the ground and they just sort of take off. I highly recommend planting with plugs. They're less expensive and they give you the exact same return on investment within a year or two. So this is a year later. And my husband used to have to mow the lawn in the summer every week. He hated it. He would always complain because it's 100 degrees for every summer. Now we go out and weed 30 minutes once or twice. That's it. This is without irrigation after the first year. So this year we had multiple heat waves breaking 100 degrees. We irrigated 5 times. And this is a little patio and little space to sit in the garden and have your morning coffee. And what we tried to recreate here was a native garden that doesn't look like a native garden. My husband is from Mediterranean and he loves cypress trees. He loves rosemary and sage and all of these plants of like dry limestone soils. So not where we live. But this is a native juniper, Juniperus virginiana Taylor. So it's a cultivar narrow. It still has berries. It still provides food for wildlife. This is a hybrid Catinus smokebush trace, which is a hybrid of the American smokebush and the European, which is again, it's got that burgundy foliage so many people want in their gardens and is not really that common in our natural spaces, and it's smaller. So ways to achieve these European kind of garden sensibilities with our native plants do exist. We have 90% native plants and cultivars for this. So how can you do this at home? So first off, kill your lawn. Or most of it. Instead of wall-to-wall carpet, think about an area. We have still around 500 square feet of lawn in our backyard so that my kids can run around and fall down and the dog can use the bathroom or whatever. But the majority of the space is garden, is providing food for wildlife. Even the forgotten corners of the property. I have what I call my weed garden in the back, where I just let it sort of go fallow. And I chop down perennials in the spring and I sometimes just top them in that corner. And this year we've had goldfinches for the first time because we left those seed heads in place. Plant native. So what is a native plant? There are many different definitions. The baseline is a native plant are plants that existed in North America before the arrival of Europeans, before 1492. They are plants that have co-evolved with the insects that live here. So this is a really great quote. Don't love to read off the PowerPoint, but this one I think is important enough. Most insects that eat plants can develop and reproduce only on the plant with which they share an evolutionary history. So you might have a butterfly bush that you swear butterflies go wild for every summer. That's junk food butterflies. Not providing a larval host for baby caterpillars that feed birds. We need baby caterpillars to have butterflies, but also, does anybody know how many caterpillars it takes for a Carolina chickadee to mature to the moment it leaves the nest? Any guesses? 400, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. 1,000. It takes 1,000 caterpillars for a baby bird to build up the strength and its organisms in order to be able to leave the nest and survive. So if you don't have caterpillars, those baby birds are not gonna, they're gonna run out of luck. So basically, Eric Carl lied. Caterpillars can't eat sausage and pickle. The good thing my daughter's not here. Caterpillars need their larval host plants. If you want to have monarchs, you need to plant milkweed. If you want spice bush swallowtail, you need to plant spice bush. If you want to have zebra swallowtail, you need pawpaw. If you want to see a Luna moth and have good luck for the next year, you need the trees that feed Luna Moms. You need birches, walnuts, hickories, oaks. So even though you see butterflies and bees on butterfly bush and other plants that are beautiful and seem very popular, they're not providing that critical ecosystem service that makes it possible for the next generation of those insects to continue. And what is the plant community? So plants are like us. They don't like to live alone. We see a lot of plants, though, that are living in a vast sea of mulch. So a better way to think about planting is, you have your one species that you really want to have in your garden. We have this conversation a lot in our family. But think about where that plant lives in nature. So these are 4 different plant communities from different spots in the wild. So this is a wet woodland in the upper left-hand corner. So we have different kinds of ferns, wild geraniums, and it's good to go to nature, go to these wild places to see how these plants are living together. One of my favorite places to go is to the Rocky Outcroppings over the Potomac River. So that's the upper right-hand corner there. This is a really hard place for plants. There's a lot of disturbance. The soil is very thin. It's hot. There's wind. So the plants that can survive there would be great plants for a parking lot median. And it's true. Little blue stem, moss phlox, Euphorbia corralata. These plants that can handle really tough conditions really do well in our own tough man-made conditions. So you can look for inspiration in the natural world. This is from Catalucci, lower right hand. So you see there the sedge brown layer that knits it all together. And popping up through it, you have Christmas fern, you have maybe some bloodroot, some wild geranium, some asters. Asters are so critical for late season forage for wildlife. And here is a wet meadow in the DC area. So one of the best places to look for plant inspiration are under power lines, where the utility company is mowing frequently, and you can see the toughest plants that reemerge in that hot, sunny environment. And those are plants that are going to do really well in a new development where the soil's been disturbed, it's full sun, and the plants that are used to really comfortable soils like in Catalucci, where there's a thick layer of topsoil, they're going to do better. So you can take inspiration from those wild plants and then refine that. Maybe you use a cultivar instead of the straight native species, and you can create these kinds of design landscapes. This is the New York Botanical Gardens native plant woodland. So you see, it's basically taking a native plant community and just amping it up. So where you might have 3 tiarella, 4 carex, 5 ferns, next you're going to have 50 tiarella. So you get a beautiful ribbon of flowers weaving through the woodland. And on the right, that's a close-up of a garden that we did in Silver Spring, where you can see at the ground layer, there's 10 different plants. They're all knitting together and fulfilling different niches in the environment. What's one thing that you don't see in any of these pictures? Grass, mulch. There's no mulch in nature. There's leaf litter. But think about mulch as just another way to fund Home Depot. So what inputs does your garden really need? And are there ways you can find living species to fulfill those niches? So instead of bringing in mulch, plant some more stems to knit together and cover the ground so you don't have to bring in mulch every year. All plants are not created equal. So plant native, plant communities, plant keystone species. This is an archival image from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park of a chestnut tree. The old American chestnut trees, which no longer exist, though the American Chestnut Foundation in Asheville is trying to bring them back. But these used to be the keystone species of our eastern forests. Now we have oaks. And again, Doug Tallamy has written this fabulous book, The Nature of Oaks, that will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about oak trees and what they do for the environment. A single white oak can support more than 500 species of caterpillars. So if you can only do one thing, plant an oak tree. And keystone species are important for our woody plants and our trees, but also we can think about keystone species for our perennials. So late in the year, so summer is just a bounty of things for insects to eat, and spring. In the fall, there are fewer food sources. And that's why solidago, goldenrod, and asters are so important. Here's a photo of solidago and asters. These are really critical sources of food late in the season for those insects that are getting tired. It's the end of the year and they're about to hibernate. They really need something to just bring them over the finish line. I know this is very small to read. This is just a reference for you guys to check out online. The National Wildlife Federation has this Garden for Wildlife list of keystone species that's based on research. It will tell you how many different insects rely on each of these different genus. So how many rely on oaks, on wild cherry. It's a great place to start in your own garden to look at what you have and what you could have to supply food. Sure, it's Garden for Wildlife by the National Wildlife Federation.
That particular application.
It's even here. You already did the work. Thank you. Go see your best characters. And generally talk to your best characters. So the next thing, don't plant invasive species. So friends don't let friends plant invasive. One of my least favorite plants is Nandina domestica, heavenly bamboo. There was a small study done in Georgia that the cyanide in the berries was killing off cedar waxwing songbirds. It's a small study, but for me, that was just enough because I already didn't like the plant. So if you need evidence for your neighbor who has Nandina, just give them that paper. A species becomes invasive if it outcompetes our native plant and displaces native species in the ecosystem. So when Martha Stewart posted on her social media last fall or last winter a beautiful image of the woodlands by her Connecticut home full of burning bush. That was a great example of how competitive burning bush is and has suppressed all the other plants in the forest. She didn't know. She was a pillory of But invasive plants also, they cost a lot of money to remediate. So our government spends $35 billion to remediate the effects of invasive plants every year. And I don't need to tell you about kudzu because it's a fish. So here are some suggestions. Common plants that I have seen, in gardens that can be replaced with native alternatives. Barberry. So barberry is deer resistant. So be resistant to anyone who wants to come near it because it's so spiky. In farmers' ticks. If you put a white paper towel underneath barberry in our area, you will see ticks every day. Don't plant it. The berries of barberry and a lot of other invasive plants like burning bush, they again are junk food for our native songbirds. Ornithologists at Cornell have done research about the fat content of different varying shrubs in the fall and the winter. These non-native plants have very low fat content. Very low fat content. Our native plants that vary, like this beautiful viburnum nudum, have very high fat content. So imagine you're a songbird who has to fly from Nova Scotia to Mexico or Cuba. You really need to store up a lot of fat to make that journey. If all the food that's available to you is burning bush and barberry and other low-fat berries, you're not going to make it. So it's really important for our songbirds that we have plants that can provide them the food and nourishment that they need to make those migrations. Burning bush, I see planted on banks all the time. It doesn't sucker. It doesn't hold soil. I don't really understand it. There are so many better choices. Itea virginica is this is the suckering native plant that will help hold soil on banks. And it has beautiful pendulous white flowers. And in the fall, it looks like it's on fire. As you drive to Asheville, right to 240, there is so much miscanthus that's gone wild all over the highway medians. Again, a plant that was brought over by well-meaning landscape nurserymen decades and decades ago has just escaped into the wild and taken over. Instead of miscanthus, Panicum virgatum or Virginia switchgrass. Beautiful panicles that bloom in the fall and songbirds love to eat them. This is a very low maintenance upright grass. Some species, some cultivars of this are 3 feet tall, Cape Breeze. Others are 9 feet tall. There's a wide variety of trees. A lot of people don't realize that Pentacetum is also invasive. Little blue stem is not. It looks like it's almost neon when it emerges in the summer. It's beautiful, and then it fades to this beautiful ochre color. So Japanese Pachysandra terminalis, is now being classified as an invasive species. Great news, you have a native version. The native Pachysandra takes a little bit longer to establish, but it is evergreen, it's beautiful, and it provides food for wildlife. I think most people are probably familiar with Liriope, monkey turf. So Liriope is also invasive. Even the clumping ones that are not invasive, they're often sold under wrong names by Home Depot, by Lowe's. You put it in your garden, and the next thing you know, it's taken over the whole thing. It's very hard to type these things in the growing business when you're just moving quickly to move product. So again, Carex is a great alternative. We replace a lot of Liriope with creek sedge, Carex amphibola. It can take full sun, it can take shade, it can take wet, it can take dry, very tough. But most importantly, try moving away from the annual grind to planting a garden of native perennials, grasses, and ground covers. Every time we disrupt our soil by bringing in annuals, we're disrupting the beneficial relationships between all the different fungi and mycorrhizae in our soil. So instead of doing that, you could plant once and have your native plants break up the soil pores, feed the soil by capturing nitrogen and putting it into the soil. And then you don't have to bring in new plants every year. And again, line the pockets of Home Depot and Lowe's. So plant native, plant communities, plant in communities, plant keystone species, don't plant invasive species, plant for soil health. And get to know your local naturalists and get outside. The best place to look for inspiration for your gardens is not in Gardens Illustrated, though I love that magazine. Go to the national park. Go on one of Bigelow's botanical excursions and learn about the native flowers. You have access to wonderful apps on your phones that can identify plants that you see in an instant. I love iNaturalist, it's a great app. PlantNet is also really helpful. And the wonderful scientists at Great Smoky Mountains National Park have also created this compendium of plant communities. They've done the work for you. So you can just go online to NatureServe and look for this publication. Inside are listed all the different types of plant communities that make up the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, with lists of all the plants that are found in the wild in those plant communities. So if you see on your property, we have a bunch of walnuts, it's really shady, we have some spice bush, you can go into this really helpful booklet and look for the type of native plant community that you can find and recreate on your own property. So thank you so much for having me. If you haven't had a chance to talk with all the amazing vendors outside, please do. Check out their website. Wild Ones has fantastic planting designs on their website. If you really want kind of a plug and play garden that has the species selected for you. And a big thank you. I don't know the growers in this area because they don't practice here, but a big thank you to all the growers who are growing without neonicotinoids and doing the hard work to bring these plants to the market. And thank you, Mary Alice and Susan and the whole Creation Caroline for having me. Thank you. We have a day before we go outside.
When you take out a lawn and you put like a carpet, low stuff in there. Mentioned that you do that, it kind of chokes out the weeds, but then you're still gonna get weeds there. If you can't get to the weeds without stepping on your plants, how do you get around that?
Most plants can survive if you step on them. How do you get into weed your new garden without stepping on your beautiful, delicate plant? Well, most plants can handle it if you step on them once or twice, but leave spaces in between your plants for when they're young. So we typically, from growers, you'll have advice that you should plant something at 24 inches on center or 3 feet on center. So that's the distance between the plants at maturity. The first year or two that you plant a garden, it's not going to be that big. So you'll be able to weave in between to pull out the weeds. We always say the first year the garden sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps. So the first 2 years, you're waiting for it to grow. It's kind of like a duck paddling furiously under the water. You can't see much happening above ground. And then once the root system is established, it will explode in the third year. Yeah. Yeah.
Because of that side, you have to have some grass.
Yeah.
Are there better twigs that are more ecologically friendly or an actual, for the grass area you have to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you have plants and you really need to have some grass for your plants to run through, what type of grasses are maybe more ecologically beneficial? So one thing I will say first is that I have a number of clients with small children and dogs. And there are plants that you can plant that are grass-like, that they can just run through and explore. And it's much more sensory input for children, actually, not to just have a monoculture of grass, but to have maybe some old logs that they can hop over. We create natural playscapes, actually, is another thing that we do. And children love being able to get their hands dirty and make mud pie. And it's just really good for their emotional development too. There's a great book called The Last Child in the Woods about the importance of nature for children's emotional regulation and sensory development. If you really want to have some lawn, in this area, it's cool enough that you could probably grow the no-mow mix from Prairie Moon that you can get online. There's a lot of no-mow seed mixes that work in the Midwest where it's cooler. We've trialed them in the DC area, but it's just too hot and humid. Now, Cuba has a new trial of sedges that they just released of Carex species, and there are some that you can actually mow. Which means they never bloom and provide food for birds, but it's better than, just your best used blend. So Carex woody eye, wood sedge is a new one that's emerging as a good lawn alternative. And you can't find it anywhere because everyone's trialing it.
Juga, yes, no.
And Juga is invasive. A great alternative to a Juga is lyre leaf sage. So Salvia lyrata. And there's a cultivar called Purple Knockout that has purple leaves. Beautiful, it spreads very good. Yeah.
So I saw the map that like showed the plant and stuff and like yeah. And I want to know, because I live in Massachusetts, what the stuff is for Massachusetts.
That's a great question. There are some really great gardens where you are in the Northeast that have tons of examples of things you can grow. So starting at the coastal Maine Botanic Garden, they have a lot of information online. And if you go to Homegrown National Park, there's a lot of there. So if you go to this website, Homegrown National Park, they have a lot of lists of plants that are really well adapted to Massachusetts. Thank you. Yes,
Probably not the only person in the room who has English ivy taken over the world. What can you do about doing everything else? It's gotten seriously invasive.
Yeah, it is very, very invasive. English ivy, a lot of people plant on banks because they think it'll help hold the soil. But it doesn't have very deep roots. So actually what we find repeatedly when we pull it out manually is that the soil underneath has washed away. So it's really not a great solution for banks. A better solution are actually grasses, sedges, and deep-rooted perennials that will help hold the soil, or things like the itea, suffering shrubs. So we remove ivy by pulling it out by hand. But
Yeah.
again, that's
And
like
again,
amazing, and again. So you really you have to do sort of like a big removal, and then for the next 3 to 4 years, just stay on top of it. But we've had good luck.
Is there any diseases that attack English ivy?
Not that I know of, but if I find one, that'll be my $1 million idea.
What about Virginia Point? We have that.
Same thing, I would just pull it out, it is invasive.
What
Yeah.
about poison ivy?
Poison ivy is not invasive. It's really native moss. It seems like it is. In the back. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
So you were talking, my question is, Billy, I'm new to the area, I kind of was on the East Coast. The problem with having a vegetable garden. What caterpillars are good and what ones are bad? Because that's the problem.
Yes, yes. This is where the aims of humans and wildlife sometimes.
So,
Yeah. So I would highly recommend getting iNaturalist. So that you can start to get to know the insects in your garden. You can take a picture and it'll ID it for you. So you can know friend or foe. iNaturalist is a great source.
and as far as like between gardening and what natural, so they definitely gardening for natural, whatever can survive without. I wanted to be from Utah.
Yeah.
My parents like actually won awards for landscaping.
Nice. Yeah,
But definitely definitely want more stores around here happening like just
Yeah.
So is there a difference, like what is good for your garden compared to a vegetable garden? Or is it all good and just trying to get rid of those bad?
Yeah, well, we depend on pollination for so many things in the garden. But a lot of the seeds that we get in our vegetable gardens are not necessarily native, right? I mean, corn is an exception in North America. I would say keep a buffer area. In England, they have these beautiful hedgerows that just like the wild, which are great places to sort of concentrate wild plants, wild birds, caterpillars, away from the crops that you're growing for your own consumption.
They don't do nothing.
So plant things that are more attractive to those insects, those caterpillars. And then there are some caterpillars that are just nuisances that yes, they're around. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Is bugleweed and majuba?
Yeah, that is the Jugas common name.
So it's the same.
It is invasive. Yeah, but lyre leaf sage, Salvia lorata, it's super tough. You'll see it on the sides of the roads here and the higher elevations. It's a great native plant. Yeah.
You mentioned mulberry.
Yeah.
Invasive.
So mulberries are tricky. I have a coworker who is a food forest designer who really loves mulberries because the berries are fun for kids, they're delicious. Our native mulberry is basically not as aggressive as the Asian mulberry that was brought to the US. So what happened is a hybridization of the Asian and the native mulberry. So most mulberries you see, especially in my area, but it's a lot more disturbance in like DC, are the Asian mulberry or some version of that. So they don't provide as much food for invertebrates. So we typically treat them as invasive species, unless someone's growing a food forest and they get a particular cultivar of mulberry that we know is genetically a native mulberry. That's their safest bet.
I would think they'd be junk.
Yes, yeah, the Asian mulberries are a junk food.
My participation at the planetary.
Is recorded, so we will get it out to, at least to our parish. Put it on a bracelet, website?
Yeah.
A lot of people couldn't be here.
Thank you so much. So I think we're gonna.
So yeah, Rebecca has agreed to walk us around our campus and I in particular have questions about certain spots. And you all can just ask, to your heart's content. We'll start out this way through the Memorial Garden and wander around this way and then back up to the exhibits out front.
See the trees. So you want to have that. Yeah. I know. Thanks. Okay, two house, right, it's on fire. Very good. My brother look at it. I've been spraying these dogs, they're orange. Oh. Yeah, they get out. That's too. And then just hopefully have some. Stop back there. Oh my God, my God.
Nice to meet you. Okay, I'm gonna go and, oh, you want to say hello? You gonna go walk in? Yes.
Yes. It's just I, yeah. Chapel Hill. Because I thought with the plants and different school. And anyway, Professor Rich Bell. And with revival.
I don't care.
Yeah. And so anyway. He was passing out, but he was the person. He was the and,
On the 10th. Once. Anyway, it was just. Yes. But anyway, so it's really good to meet you. Yeah. Yeah. Well. Make it. Okay. This is a great. I haven't seen it. Get them out.